In our last lesson, we were looking at how to graph quadratic equations. And today we're going to look at a couple of different kinds of functions that we're going to graph. That is cubic and exponential. If the graph is going to be a cubic function, then the highest exponent on the x value is going to be 3. 3 is cubed, so cubic function will be the highest one. You can have up to 4 terms, as you see here. Some of these terms, the coefficient may be 0, and if the coefficient is 0, you will not see that term, so you can have up to 4 terms, but the highest exponent is a 3. And if you look right here, this is what a cubic function is going to basically look like. It's almost like the parabola of a quadratic equation, except when you get to the second half of it, you're going to flip it over. So it looks like this. And let's look at an example of t-chart here with the cubic function. So here again, you only see one term that could have up to 4. This means the other 3 terms, the 0 was the coefficient in front of them. So again, what we're going to do to graph this is to make a t-chart. And again, we're going to choose -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2 as our domain, because that keeps us towards the center of the graph. And we're going to just plug in these numbers and create the ordered pairs. So if we plug in a -2 to this equation right here, 2x cubed, when we plug in the -2, it needs to go into parentheses. And the first step we're going to do is always the exponent. So -2 cubed is the same thing as -2 times -2 times -2, which would be a -8. And then we multiply that times 2, and you get a -16. So our ordered pair is -2, -16. If we plug in a -1 to the parentheses, we do the exponent first, and -1 multiplied times itself 3 times is -1, and -1 times 2 is a -2. So our new order pair is -1, -2. Now you do know where I'm getting the x term. That's from the x right here. This is what we plugged in for x. So that's where I'm getting the x for the ordered pair. Okay, now we're going to plug in 0. 0 is a really nice number to plug in, because when you plug in 0, 0 to the third power is 0, and 0 times 2 is 0. So there's our point of 0, 0. Let's plug in 1. We're going to do 1 cubed first. So 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. Multiply that times 2, and you get 2. So our order pair is 1, 2. If we plug in a 2, you're going to do the 2 cubed first. And 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. And we multiply that times 2, and we get 16. So our order pair is 2, 16. So if you look here, you'll notice, if you remember the quadratic functions, remember when we went out, we would have the same number here. We would have 2 and 2. This would be 2 and 2. And then this one, if this one's 16, this one would be 16. But with this one, it's the same, except the numbers are the opposite. And that's what creates this shape that looks like a parabola, where half of it was turned upside down and the other half goes up. Draw that. My best effort at drawing it without a big smart board. Okay, the next function we're going to look at is the exponential function. That means that you'll see an exponent. You're going to be plugging in the x values to an exponent. An exponential function is going to start out, and it's going to start out increasing very slowly, and then all of a sudden it's going to take off into a very sharp incline. So this is basically what an exponential function is going to look like. So let's see what this looks like when we plug in numbers. This time we're plugging in the number to the exponent. Now, if you remember our lesson on negative exponents, when you have a negative exponent, we have to move it downstairs. So right now we have 2 to the -2 power. We have to move it downstairs into the denominator to take away the negative. So we have 1 over 2 squared, and 2 squared is 4, so that would make it 1/4. So this is 1/4 plus 1, and 1/4 plus 1 is 1 and 1/4. So our new order pair is -2, 1 and 1/4. If we plug in -1, again we have, oh, there it is on the graph. we have a negative exponent, so since we have 2 to the negative first power in the numerator, we have to move it downstairs to get rid of the negative exponent. So that's just going to be 1/2, and 1/2 plus 1 is 1/2. So our new order pair is -1, and then the half plus 1, so it's 1 and 1/2. If we plug in a 0, we have learned that any number raised to the 0 power is 1. Anything to the 0 power is 1. So 1 plus 1 is 2. So that order pair is 0, 2. So you can see as we started our graph here, it was kind of a gradual incline that's going on right now. When we plug in 1 to the exponent, we have 2 to the first power, which is 2, plus 1 is 3, so our order pair is 1, 3. Notice now our graph is starting to increase in height pretty quickly. We plug in 2. 2 to the second power is 4, and 4 plus 1 is 5, so our order pair is 2, 5. So you can see that's going to, if we backed up, this would be very gradual, and now it's going to take off going uphill very fast. An exponential function. So we've looked at 3 different kinds. We looked at quadratic, where you have the parabola. We've looked at a cubic, where you have what looks like a parabola on the top, and then the second half gets bended down. And we have the exponential that starts out slow and then takes off. So what kind of function is this one right here? Is it quadratic, exponential, or cubic? This one's the exponential. This is where it starts out slow and then takes off. What kind of function would this be? That shape is a parabola, so that is a quadratic equation. This is a straight line, and straight lines are called linear equations. Here's the one that again looks like it could be a parabola, but the second half has been bended down, and that kind of function is a cubic function. Let's look at an example from the real world. Helen runs 5 miles every other day. She wants to increase the number of miles she runs to train for a marathon. She plans to increase the mileage according to this function, where x represents the number of times she goes running. So this is the number of times she runs. So let's plug in these numbers. Now, I gave you the domain this time. The domain is going to be 0, 3, 6, 9, and 12. Notice we didn't use negative numbers because x represents the number of times she runs, and she can't run a negative number. So we only have a 1-quadrant grid here. So let's plug in 3 and see what that would look like. Plug in 0 first, sorry. So first you always do the exponent first, and 1 and 1/10, anything to the 0 power is 1, and 1 times 5 is 5, so our order pair is 0, 5. There it is on the graph. If we plug in 3, 1 and 3/10 cubed, so in your calculator you can type in 1.1 raised to the 3rd power, just push enter, and then you're going to multiply it times the 5, and you're going to get 6 and 66/100ths. 3 is the x, 6 and 66/100ths is the y. If we plug in 6, this time with our calculator, we want to type in, we always do the exponent first. So on your calculator, you're going to type in 1 and 1/10 raised to the 6th power, enter. Then you're going to multiply that times 5, and your calculator should say 8 and 86/100ths. These numbers are probably rounded. It would be good for you to take your calculator and practice typing these in and seeing if you're getting the same result. If we plug in a 9 to the exponent, we're going to do 1 and 1/10 raised to the 9th power first, so you type in 1 and 1/10 raised to the 9th power, push enter, and then go times 5. And that would result in the order pair of 9 and 11 and 79/100ths. And the same thing with 12. This time we're going to type in 1 and 1/10 raised to the 12th power, push enter, times 5, and that would result in the order pair of 12 and 15 and 7/10ths. Remember, here's where I'm getting the x value for the order pair, and then you did the calculation to find the y. And when you graph these over here, This is an exponential function, so it's going to, if it continued this way, which it doesn't, because we only have a one quadrant grid, it's going to take off a little bit slowly and then start getting steeper and steeper and steeper as it goes. If you're doing the assignment that I've handed out to you, I think this is number 1 on your page that we could do together. So again, we're going to plug in the numbers -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2 to x. So we have 5 times -2 cubed. We always do the cubed first, the exponent first, and -2 times -2 times -2 is a -8, and -8 times 5 is 40. Whoops, back up. So that would be 5 and -40. Now obviously with -40 that's going to be really hard to graph. So we're going to go over to 5 and it's going to be somewhere way down here in our paper. Okay, let's plug in -1. Whoops. Sorry about that. So let's do 5 times -1 cubed. We're going to do the cubed first, the exponent first. And -1 times -1 times -1 is a -1. Times 5 is -5. So our order pair, I don't know why I wrote 5 up there. I just looked up there and saw that 5. You probably already noticed that. That was -2, -40. My eyes went to this number instead of to this number, and I made a mistake up there. So watch what you're doing. I made a mistake. Okay, we plugged in the -1, and -1 times 5 is -5. So I can now graph -1, -5. Mix this dot in the wrong place. This point. This was -2, -40, which is way down here, and -1, -5 is here. Now we're on track. Let's plug in 0. 0 cubed is 0, and 0 times 5 is 0. So our order pair would be 0, 0. So we can put a point at 0, 0. Plug in 1, 5 times 1 cubed. 1 cubed is 1, times 5 is 5. So our order pair is 1, 5. So you can see that here it went down very narrow-like, and now it's starting to go up like this. If we plug in 2, 2 cubed is 8, and 8, 2 cubed is 8, and 8 times 5 is 40, so we have the order pair 2, 40. It's going to be way up here somewhere. Something like that, except that should be more of a straight line like that. Okay, this is the last one we're going to do. This one I think is number 5 if you're doing the assignment with me. This is an exponential function. So we're going to plug in the -2 to the exponent. So we have 2 raised to the -2 power minus 4. Remember, when we have a negative exponent, we have to move it downstairs. So 2 to the -2 power, we have to move to the denominator. That would make it 2 squared. 2 squared is 4, so that gives us 1/4. We have 1/4 minus 4. So if you think of the number 4 and you take away 1/4, what is left is 3 and 3/4. And we're going to keep the negative. So our order pair was -2, -3, and 3/4. If we plug in a -1, again, we have to move it downstairs to get rid of the negative exponent. So we have 1/2 minus 4. And if you take a half away from 4, that would be 3.5. And it's going to be negative. This would be -3.5. If we plug in 0, anything to the 0 power is 1. So you have 1 minus 4 is -3. So you have 0, -3. If you plug in 1, 2 to the first power is 2. Minus 4 is a -2. And if you plug in 2 to the exponent, 2 squared is 4. And 4 minus 4 is 0. So let's look at this over here and see if we can graph it now. We have -2, -3 and 3/4, so you go down almost to -4. We have -1 and -3.5, which is about right there. 0, -3, 1, -2, and 2, 0. So you can see it started out kind of gradual, and now it's steadily increasing. exponential function. So there are examples of cubic and exponential functions.